So today I am giving a talk about talks, so it's super meta. So I hope you're awake enough to get it. So let's begin with this. How many of you, when you hear that you need to give a pitch or presentation, look for your inhaler? Anybody? Yeah? Or panic, hives, maybe? Anybody? Yeah? Awesome. So we're going to try and make that a little better for you, maybe less puffs on the inhaler today, okay? So my talk today is called Talk the Talk, Making Your Message Stick. And when Brett and Carl gave me a call, they had said that they did some surveys on business development and kind of the crew here, what they wanted to learn, skills that they wanted to improve on. And one of the things that came up was being better at presentations and being better at pitches. And so they asked if I could give a talk on that. So at first I was a little stumped because normally I do workshops, so there will be a little bit of interactivity, so it's going to be closer to the end, so hopefully by that point you don't need your inhaler or need to look for the nearest exit. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, my background, some stories, and then also some tips on things that I do for myself and things that I do for my clients to help them prepare for their presentations as well as deliver them. So let's take you back to my early childhood where I really enjoyed putting on shows for my parents. So I have this one memory of finding these really ugly 70s bed sheets and pretending that they were these beautiful curtains. And I placed them, I taped them up in the living room so that I had a nice entryway to come in. I was very dramatic. I had my brother by my side. I usually forced him to do shows with me. He later became a computer engineer, so turns out, yeah, he was definitely not his favorite thing to do. And I would walk out, and then I would sing The Sun Would Come Out Tomorrow. My brother played the dog, Sandy, which he totally loved. And my parents, anxiously awaited my beautiful performance. Soon after that, they signed me up for an improv class. So about 10 years old, I started improv and basically never stopped. I really loved it. I fell in love with the group environment, the idea that everybody has a voice, playing off one another, thinking on the spot, and being creative. And that's a really good thing to find when you're 10 and have, it turns out later on, as some skills in your back pocket. So flash forward to college, where in order to make a living and pay for my classes, I was part of a talent agency. And I had the honor of playing many costume characters. Some a two-headed dragon was one that was great. I was some of the Disney characters in the Toy Story parade. And my favorite of all was the day I got a call and they said, "Jessie, we need you tomorrow." And I'm like, "Sure, I'm your girl. What do you need?" And they said, "We want you to be an orange." And I was like, "All right, I'll be your orange, whatever that means." And they said, "Okay, so here's the details. We're going to have you dress up as an orange for Minute Maid, and you're going to stand in front of the Minute Maid counter at an opening of a new Walmart." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got this." So anyway, I remember I went into the stock room to get ready, and it was a blow-up orange costume that my hands barely fit out the sides. And right before I went out to make my debut, they told me, "Talk like an orange." I'm like, "Great, sure." So I did. I figured oranges probably have squeaky voices. And there was a boy I remember who talked to me, and I was like, "Hi." I don't know. I had no idea what an orange sounded like. We had a great conversation, very deep. And then he brought his mom up to tell me, talk to my mom, Orange. I'm like, I didn't say anything. I just thought it would be funny just to go mute. And he didn't like that, so he tried to run me over with his shopping cart. So that was great. So it's good to know what you don't want to do with your skills. I don't want to be an orange. So right before I started my company, I was a teacher. And this is a great way to sort of hone your presentation skills, right? So every day you're expected to get up in front of kids and facilitate learning and present different information in order to watch a transformation happen with kids. So this was another way that I used my skills in order to present. So that leads us to today. I'm Jessie, Stare at Your Shoes, or Stare in Shoes. There's not enough vowels in my last name, so lots of people don't even bother trying, and that's fine. So I'm the owner of the Improv Effect. It's a company that I started about 9 years ago, and we use improv and other experiential techniques, and we help people with communication, collaboration, and creative problem solving. And I've used all of the skills that I've learned and continue to use skills that I learn in the things that I do today. So when I first started my company, I had the opportunity to speak locally in Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm from. Jacksonville in the house. So I got the opportunity to speak, and then I had some more opportunities to speak at local things like user groups, meetup groups, things like that. And eventually I got asked to do a conference. And sort of as my business grew, I started realizing that I could trace back about 80% of my business to people that I had met from speaking or facilitating at conferences. And so once I had enough data collected on that, I said, okay, I should be probably doing more of this. This is a great marketing tool for me. This is getting my word out there to multiple people at the same time. And it also was a great way to get my foot in the door at some big companies where they could hear me speak, but then I was able to let them know that I also do training, and that's what I really love. So it was a great way to get my foot in the door at all these places. So the other thing I noticed is that for whatever reason, speaking equals expert. And call me clueless, but I had no idea that's actually what would happen. And it turns out that even if you have as much knowledge as the people that are watching you, for whatever reason, standing up here makes you the expert. So I'm like, okay, probably should do more of that. And so I did. So I've made it a point every year to speak at a handful of conferences and get the word out there so I could be seen as the expert. I've also watched lots of people that I met early on in my career who, like developers, designers, the ones who got up and spoke, even if it's just at a user group, or they pitched or whatever, and they practiced those skills, I saw their careers skyrocket past the people that weren't. And so it really is something that helps you build your brand, and it helps you elevate who you are, I guess you could say. So why don't we pull back the ugly curtains, and I will give you some ideas about how I prepare and how I help other people prepare for their talks, as well as what I do for the delivery and how I use improv to help me do that. So, first of all, there are two types of speakers, okay? There's a self-centric speaker, and there's an audience-centric speaker. So what does this mean? So the self-centric speaker delivers a talk that they want to give without concern for what their audience is thinking, feeling, or wanting. Now that could sound a little bit negative, but it might be that there's something that you really want to talk about and you get very excited and you start putting together a talk, and then you find a way to fit that into something else. So you take your agenda and you fit it in somewhere else, as opposed to the audience-centric speaker. This is somebody who delivers the talk that the audience wants to hear. They use their language, they use concepts, they use stories, and they use visuals that resonates with the audience and leads them to action, okay? So from this point forward, I'm going to consider that we're talking about an audience-centric speaker, okay? For instance, when I talked to Carl and he told me that there was a need to learn about presentation skills, I then started to think about what talk I would build in order to help whoever was watching, right? So it went that way versus me creating it and then finding a thing to put it in. So, all right. So we start with a presentation prep. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have a Google Doc where I'll write down a bunch of ideas that I have around the topics that I know, okay? And then I'll write another column for the topics that I love, okay? And they're not always the same thing. There might be things you know a lot about, but they're not necessarily what you're passionate about. And then topics that your audience cares about. And the sweet spot is really right in the middle. Where do all those things collide? And the nice thing about keeping a Google Doc or some sort of document, it could be Evernote, then you sort of are hyper-focused, so when you hear things that kind of go with the topic you're thinking about or the audience you're thinking about, you have one place you can go to find it, and it makes it a lot more simple, and then you're kind of hyper-focused on it. It's sort of like if you break your arm, all of a sudden you notice all these other people that break their arm. So there might be all these really cool little things that happen that you wouldn't notice were you not kind of thinking about it in the back of your mind. So, since we're audience-centric, we want to understand who our audience is, right? And so these are two techniques that I use to help me kind of think through who my audience is. So there's what's called an audience analysis, and you ask questions like this. Why are they here? What are they like? What do you want them to do? I like to take that further and say, what do you want them to say, do, and feel after they hear you talk? Okay? How can you make their lives better? And how can you best reach them? Okay? And so if we were thinking about today, I might start thinking about, okay, who's going to be in the audience at Owner Summit? And I might ask all these questions. What's interesting about this is something you could use, a framework you could use when you're doing, you're going out there and trying to figure out who your users are, who your customers are. You can use this exact same thing. And the whole idea behind it is you should have empathy for the people that you're going to be presenting or pitching information to. And this is a way to get prepared. Another thing you could do is use this empathy map. How many of you have seen this before? Empathy map. So how many of you have ever used it for a talk? Okay, so same thing again. So there's probably a lot of frameworks that you use for other things that if you thought about it, you could kind of insert them into preparing a pitch or presentation. So same idea. You want to think about, okay, who's going to be in my audience? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What do they hear? What do they see? What can they say? What can they do? And this starts to help you get a better idea and sort of step into their shoes. And this is great, right? When you're at a conference, there's a bunch of like-minded people. They're probably all there for similar reasons. But it's important for you to know that they're actually individuals, right? So they're not a bunch of amorphous blobs staring at your face, right? They have different wants and different needs. And at the end of the day, you're not necessarily going to appeal to every single one, and that's okay. But I think what's good to do is have some preparation and have some understanding and appeal to as many people as you can just by having that empathy. So once we know who our audience is, then we want to start developing our message. And a really big pet peeve of mine is watching people who present with like 1 million words on the page and a bunch of bullets. It's just so frustrating, right? It's very hard to sit through that, and it's hard to even take in what's being said, because what will happen is we're trying to fight between reading your slides and listening to you. And the point is you're there to speak. There's a reason why you're there to pitch or to speak. And if you're distracting them by your slides, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. So a better way to do that is to tell stories, right? And those stories can help make your point. You can think of what are those bullets or points that I want to say, and is there any story that I have sort of in my back pocket that could make that same point even better? So I'll give you an example of one of the many ridiculous things that have happened to me when I've gone to give a talk, okay? So I will take you back to like about 2 years ago. I was asked to give a talk at Macy's for their engineering internal conference. And I got extremely nervous when I got the call. I was excited to work for Macy's and to do a talk and to do training, but the first thing I thought about is, oh God, like, what am I gonna wear? I'm so used to wearing like jeans, and these people care about clothes, and I have no idea what I'm gonna wear, and I don't know, I got into my head and started getting anxious about it. So I'm like looking through my closet like, oh God, what do I wear? I just want to wear jeans, like, maybe, I don't know. So I found this dress, and it was like, fine, okay. And I found these tights, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm good, And so the day comes, put on my outfit, walk in. They had rented out a movie theater to do, which is also a little bit odd. So they rented out a movie theater, And I walk in, and one of the AV guys says, "Are you Jessie?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, we need you to get mic'd up." I'm like, "All right." And then I'm like, "Oh, crap. Like, I don't have jeans on. Where am I going to put the battery pack?" So I start to freak out, like, okay, how am I going to do this? So I go behind the curtain of the movie theater, and I take the battery pack and, like, stick it in my tights and hope for the best. And as I go to give my talk, I can feel the battery pack just like slipping down, and the tights are like rolling down. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm gonna have a battery pack just like here, you know, and this is not gonna end well. Not to mention, it was attached to my head. So as it's coming down, I'm like, hey, you know, like, oh my God. So that was terrible. But anyway, so I survived. But the point of this story is maybe I could get up here and I say, these are the 5 things you should wear when you give a presentation. That's super boring, right? But instead, I just told you a really embarrassing story about myself that makes the same point, right? So wear something that you feel comfortable. Don't get in your head like, I need to get fancied up or whatever. Be comfortable, because that should be the last thing you're thinking about when you're giving a talk, because literally that's all I could think about when I gave the talk. It's like, I'm going to give birth to a battery pack, and this is not going to end well. Thank God I didn't, but it could have happened. All right. So, and the idea of doing a story is that the audience wants emotional satisfaction. That does not mean they need it to be beautifully tied up in a bow, right, and a happy Disney ending. I mean, I don't think that story sort of had a Disney ending, because I didn't give birth to the battery pack, but it's sort of embarrassing, and that's okay. What you want is for the audience to feel what you were feeling. You want them to feel what you want them to feel, right? And by doing that, it usually sticks better. It's also not such a bad thing to be vulnerable. There's actually strength in vulnerability. I always tell people that I'm coaching on presentation skills, try your hardest not to worry about being perfect all the time. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves when we pitch, when we're giving a presentation, that everything, every little detail has to be perfect, but it really doesn't. At the end of the day, I know personally, I like to be able to feel that people are comfortable coming up to me afterwards. They're comfortable talking to me, that I don't seem like there's a wall between me, right? And the more perfect you are, the less approachable you are, right? And at the end of the day, if you're trying to make relationships with your customers and the people that you're working with, not every single thing has to be perfect. I think we put way too much pressure on ourselves. All right, so once we've figured out what stories we want to tell, what I typically do is a storyboard. So how many of you have done storyboarding before? Yeah? Have you ever done it for a presentation? Anybody? Yeah. It's a really helpful technique. So each of these little like Post-its or pieces of paper would represent your visuals, okay? And then the lines would be a word or two that's kind of trigger words that help you understand what you were supposed to say at that point, and then those themes and transitions. So if I was storyboarding the embarrassing Macy story, I might have like the first visual might be me getting the call and being excited. Maybe the next is me freaking out in my closet. I don't know. The next might be putting the battery pack, because I'm so smart, in my tights, right? And then it would just go on. And what that does is it kind of helps me visualize how I want my talk to be laid out. So if you look at this, this is actually a talk I gave a keynote at Agile 2015, and this is my storyboard. So I like laid it all over my home office, and I would move it around in different places so I could visually see how I wanted it to look. And I kind of think of my talks as modular, if you will, so you could take chunks of it and move them around, and you could even use pieces of them in other talks. And then you can also visually see where the gaps are, too. So I really like using this and suggest that you maybe try it and see if you think it's a good method for you. And that talk that I gave at Agile 2015, what was interesting about it was I actually got asked to give that talk a bunch of times afterwards. And this was one of the first times where that happened, where I kept getting asked to give the same talk over and over again. And so I started to think of, my talk is almost like its own startup or its own product, right? Because it kind of had a life of its own, and that's not how I planned it to be, but I started realizing that that's what it was, and so I was trying to pay better attention to it. So once I thought about that, I was thinking, okay, well, what if you think of your presentation or your pitches as a product, and you kind of use that lean startup methodology of build, measure, and learn, right? So you're building your talk, and just like a startup, you'll build your product, right? You'll build your service, and then you would measure it, kind of collect the feedback, and see what your audience is saying, see what your customers are saying, see what your stakeholders are saying, right? And then you would measure that and learn about it so that you can continuously improve your talk, right? And it becomes a better and better talk or a better and better product, right? And so some of the things you could do to measure or to learn, you could take your ideas, and maybe you haven't given the talk yet, but you kind of know what you want to do. You could do a podcast about some of the concepts. You could tweet some of the lines of your talk or a visual from your storyboard and see what people say. Is it getting retweeted? Is it being completely ignored, right? What did people say about your podcast? When you were being interviewed, was it easy to play off one another, or were they kind of stumped with what you were saying? All these things give you information to be able to measure and to be able to learn. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Okay. So I'd like to show you one of the games that we play in Improv. It's called Color Advance. And I think I'll bring Doc up for this one, and I'll probably bring you up for another thing if you don't mind, all right? Give it up for Doc.
Have my mic on? I woke up this morning and I was like, I hope she brings me on stage for this. Theater people!
Oh, yeah!
Let's do it.
Yeah, we can smell them from a mile away. All
I
right.
I don't know what's going on. This is totally,
he actually doesn't.
Like,
And I asked him if he wanted to know, he's like, no.
I've never heard of this one.
No.
Okay.
So what you're going to do is I'd like you to connect with somebody next to you. It could be somebody behind you. It could be 3 people. It's okay. It's just about learning this exercise, and maybe it's something you could use later. So the idea for this is person A is going to tell a story, all right? And you could tell maybe a story about trying to get to Owner Summit, let's say. Let's say that's everybody's topic. Person B is the listener, okay? And they're going to say color when they want to hear more details about what you just said, okay? And they're going to say advance when they want to hear the next part of what you're saying. So they want you to move forward in the dialogue, okay? And so what I'd like you to do is, I'll show you what I mean, and then I'll give you a minute or 2 to try. So start telling a story. The listener is going to say color when they want to know more, advance when they want you to move forward, and don't feel bad like thinking it's rude to tell somebody to advance. It's a game, for God's sake. It's good to learn it during a game than like everyone falling asleep during your talk. And then you can switch. So I'll say switch, and then you can switch so each person gets a chance, okay? So do you want to tell me about your trip to get here to Owners? Oh, yeah, actually, it's actually a good story.
It is a good story. Okay, so I flew out of Atlanta, and I got to LA because it was a cheaper flight. And
color.
And it wasn't very good at LAX because I lost my driver's license.
Ooh, color.
There was a little bit of anger. It was a rental car shuttle place, and I was about to rent a car, and then I'm patting myself down and realizing
advance.
Yeah, please. And so I took a train because I knew I could get on a train without my driver's license, but she said that I might get pulled off the train if they went around and asked people for their driver's license.
Ooh, color.
Yeah, right. And so I asked her, is that something that they do normally? And she says, no, it's probably random. And then I was thinking in my mind, she's just fucking with me because she just wants to make me scared.
Color.
And so I was looking at her and she was like smiling. I was like, are you playing with me or is this something that actually happens? And
so give them a round of applause. Yeah. Perfect. So, yay!
Okay, leave.
So that's how it's done, okay? And then we would switch. So you might not get through the whole story. If you want to hear the rest of his story and how he suffered to get here, I'll
blog about it.
Yeah, he'll blog about it. So everybody understand? And then I'll say switch. So listen for me, since there's only one of me and a lot of you guys. All right, so how was that? Interesting? Good? Were you able to kind of figure out what your audience wanted to know more about pretty quickly and where they wanted you to move on? Yeah? Anything interesting anybody heard or noticed from that exercise at all? You want to share? Yeah. Yes, yes, there's a recall on Toyota matrices. Very good, very good. This is very educational. Anybody else learn anything? Yes.
I noticed that I wanted more color around emotional aspects.
Yes. Yep.
About the details or the facts.
That's right. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying. When you tell a story, most audiences want emotional satisfaction, and it changes depending if you're sitting in front of a bunch of data scientists. They might be pissed off if you don't have data points, right? But even those things, you can sprinkle a story there, and they have a heart too, right? They have emotions. Any other things that you noticed?
Sometimes the things that you think are interesting maybe aren't.
Yes, so sometimes the things you really love to tell maybe aren't the most interesting things, and that's okay. This is a really nice, low-risk way to find that out. Another interesting point is it might be that this particular audience member wasn't interested in the same things as you, but somebody else might be. And so don't just think because that one person, that's your whole entire data set, right? It's not. Right? So this is a great way to practice doing it in front of lots of different people and then kind of see what the consensus is. Yeah. Did you have one more thing in the back?
The color piece is interesting because we kind of get good at taking tangents.
Yes, yes. So it's sometimes what's hard about giving pitches especially is when you're pitching to a customer, they may take you off on a tangent or ask you more about something, and you have to kind of go deeper, or you might get sidetracked. And it's your job to be able to maintain being the expert and still get back to where you need to go. Because at the end of the day, you should have in mind what your vision is of what you want those people to say, do, and feel after they hear your pitch or your talk. And if you go off down the wild road that you weren't planning on going down and you can't get back, that might not work out that well for you. Any other thoughts on that one? Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so I was interested, the colors, in playing that game, color could mean actually have held off longer before you told the punchline.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than telling the punchline and tell more about it,
Yeah.
I think that what I really learned from it is that sometimes that punchline could really be sitting there for a while.
Yeah.
And you could get a lot more.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's good to know too. I think what's important if you want to take this game and practice it more is have that kind of conversation afterwards so you're not making an assumption of why they said color or why they said advanced. So it really just opens up a casual conversation again because it's linked to a game versus something that seems more like high risk, high stakes. So another game you could play, but I'm not going to torture you with this one, is called Pitch, Pitch Back. The idea for this is you might maybe sit with some of your colleagues. One person stands in front and they give their pitch. The other people kind of record the different things that they heard. They might even hashtag concepts, right? It's kind of like when you give a talk and then you go read Twitter and you see what were the lines that people decided they wanted to repeat, right? That's your pitch back. And what that tells you is it says, okay, A, these were the parts that really stuck out to my audience, right? The hashtags tell you, okay, this is maybe the way that they internalized what I said, and it even gives you feedback about the language that they used. And then the next time you give that pitch, you can use the language that your audience nicely gave you, right, and mirror that to be even better the next time that you give the talk. So this is kind of a nice game. And everybody would then go around and tell you what they heard, right? So the person pitches, the other people go like person 1, person 2, person 3, and they get to say what they remembered and what they heard. And what's interesting about doing it in a small group is what's really cool is if a couple of people picked up on the same points, right, or the same things, then you know that's probably something you do not want to throw away. You want to keep that piece in there, right? And you might be able to play with the different pieces, the other different pieces. So this is helping you kind of figure out what your core message is, if you will. So this is great and all when you have plenty of time to prepare, but what do you do in the unexpected, unprepared moments? So have any of you heard about a situation with Michael Bay at the Consumer Electronics conference? Yeah. So not his best day in his life. So he was asked by Samsung to present their new beautiful curved television, right? And I'm sure they paid him big bucks to do it. And so he walks out on stage, and there's the beautiful television all curved and nice, and there's an MC, probably not as good as Doc, but he'll do. And his job was to ask Michael Bay questions that Michael Bay was supposed to have prepared about the TV. And so as the MC is asking question, Michael Bay is saying literally nothing. He's just staring. He's like, well, not maybe like that face, but like he just didn't say a lot or anything at some point. So the MC is kind of picking up on the fact that that Michael Bay is uncomfortable, and luckily he could kind of read what was going on under the surface. So he asks Michael Bay, well, tell us kind of like a day in the life of Michael Bay watching Transformers on your television at home. So trying to kind of set him up for success, like let's have him talk about something that should be very familiar to him, not something he needed to memorize, something he should just know. And he, again, doesn't say anything. And then he literally turns around and walks off the stage in the middle of the interview. I'm like, oh my God. So in my mind, that's like not acceptable at all. And I would say take an improv class, Michael Bay. It might help you. All right, so improv would really have come to the rescue had he practiced it. Like I said, this is something I've practiced my whole life, and it's really helped me in so many situations, and it certainly would have helped him. And the interesting thing is, as much as sometimes when we hear that we have to do improv and we break out in hives and we start itching, what you need to realize is that we're all improvisers, right? You're improvising literally every single day of your life, okay? There is no script or formula to deal with the shift that happens every day, right? Even when shift hits the fan, all right? So every moment is a new moment, okay? You're not walking around with a scripted dialogue. You're practicing these things. So taking a class would actually help you just be better at what you're already expected to do as an owner of a business, as a human being anyway, all right? So these are some of the first people that came to my class when I first started my company, and this is just them having fun with one of the games. So I thought before we end today, we would play one more little fun game, so Doc, if you don't mind. This is called Gibberish Dictionary, and how this works is, again, you're gonna be with a partner. First person will say a made-up word to the other person. Made-up means it doesn't really exist at all. And then person B is going to immediately tell you what it means. So they're going to BS, okay, in the most expert of ways and make up a definition and own it, okay? Like, don't be like, oh, that was terrible, because then we think it's terrible because you just told us it was, all right? So do you want to give me a made-up word? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Flunta.
Flunta. Flunta. This is Latin for Latin, like in the Latin love, Spanish version, flunta. This is when you eat a flauta through your flute. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And then your word is Palanabi.
You know Palanabi?
I totally do.
Let me tell you about Palanabi. We dated back in 19...
Advance! I'm just kidding. Just joking.
No kidding.
Okay, so that's high fives. So we totally set the bar up here, guys, so good luck on that one. All right, so I'll give you a minute. I'll say switch, so you each get a chance. Just whatever comes to mind is fine. We're all friends here. Okay, please don't break the harassment policy, though. Okay, ready? Go. All right. How many of you were surprised by what the heck came out of your mouth? Yes, you're my people. All right. How many of you pre-planned what you were going to say no matter what the heck your partner gave you? Come on, be truthful. No? All right. Anybody want to share the definition in word? Anybody brave enough to share it? Yes? No? All right. So what was your word? Twickles, yes.
The definition was when you get tickled in that weird way that
Yes, Twickles, tweet that, people. All right, we learned something, yes.
So my word was crobbage.
Crobbage, yes.
Apparently a device that rich people used to use to make their mouths spread wider so they could eat more food.
I think my grandma had a crobbage or whatever. Yeah, totally. That's a great visual as well. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yeah.
My word was flignot.
What?
Flignot.
Flignot, yes,
And
yes.
Flignot was the knot that you can tie in a thread around a bee's neck and hold on a leash.
Wow, how specific. So a knot that you tie around a bee's neck, yes. It also sounded a little Swedish, too. Anybody else? Okay, so the idea of this game is about playing and using that muscle in your mind that you need for when you're put on the spot. And as owners of companies, we're put on the spot all the time. And I'm not suggesting BS your way through it. What I'm suggesting is having that muscle and flexing and using that muscle a lot so that when you're put on the spot, you're not Michael Bay, right? And you're able to say what it is if you have the answer, and you're able to say that you don't know with complete confidence and expertise, too. And one of the ways you can do this is by practicing this game. This game also helps with creativity, right? It helps with playing off others, which is important as a leader, that you hear what other people actually say, you get inspired by what you hear, and you play off of it versus forcing an agenda into the conversation and not hearing a word anybody's saying, right? So that's another thing that this game actually helps with. So if you liked these games, I wrote a book called Control Shift, and it's 50 games for 50 blanking days like today. And each chapter is a type of day that you might be having, and there's a game to go with it. A game, an exercise, some are visual, some are design thinking, some are improv. So lots of fun games if it's something you think you want to play around with. So I hope that next time you're asked to give a talk or a presentation, a pitch, that you no longer want to stick your head in the sand, that you maybe have some new ideas, thoughts, stories. You can share mine if you want to, I don't care. Some games that you like that you can use so that you feel more confident about what you're doing. You know that even if you make a mistake, it's going to be okay. It's better than not trying. So thank you so much for having me, and I love being here, you guys. Thanks.